Hey guys, so today here we have the second video for the Speedy's rankup advice series. So for this episode, the template is going to be a little bit different due to the tech and mystic classes being extremely different for how I would actually recommend ranking for those two classes. Due to how limited their uses are on attack, and we'll get into that. So that's gonna make the format of this video significantly different than the normal format. As I'll be going class by class instead of tier by tier, because it makes more sense to talk about tech and mystic within their own class with this. And yeah, let's get into it. Cosmic kind of fills in with the other classes, where it's not exactly gonna have what I'm gonna talk about with that. And yeah, if you guys haven't already watched the intro of the first video for an explanation of the ranking and everything, I highly recommend going and checking that out. There will be a playlist link in the description of this with all of the videos for this. And yeah, let's get right into it. Now, for Cosmic, in the must-have nuke section, first of all, Hercules. Now, Hercules is one I've actually seen get misused a lot in Battlegrounds outside of the top levels, because his strategy for Battlegrounds is a little bit different than his strategy for almost anywhere else, where you just want to be spamming light intercepts. You want to just go dash, single light, dash, single light, dash, single light intercepts. Just boost his damage so much in these short fights, and you're able to get some absurdly quick fights with him. And whether or not you want to go for special 2 or special 1 really depends on the situation. And yeah, but he is an absolute monster. If you have a SIG 200 and if you have recoil, it will really help. But I've still gotten sub 30 seconds with my Hercules, who's unduped, who I don't run recoil with, so he's still an absolute monster either way. But SIG 200 and recoil help a whole lot, of course. Next up, for CGR, this is kind of self-explanatory. He's CGR. Any fight CGR will work for will be a 1 round, pretty much. He is just absurdly quick, and he covers a whole lot of ground. He's a monster, especially with the lower health pools. He's still an absolute beast with the higher health pools. So I wouldn't put that symbol, but especially with the lower health pools, it's a bit ridiculous. Next up for Surfer. Now this one is a little bit interesting, because not many people think of Surfer as that massive damage champion, but in BGs he really is. And the nice thing about Surfer is that he can take so many different fights. I've stretched Surfer to an absurd amount of different fights. He really works well for just whatever you don't have an option for. Surfer can go take it in like 30 seconds, and a lot of the fights he covers are some of the most common time stallers and some of the hardest defenders. So having Surfer there is just crazy, and with the proper strategy, you can get fights under 30 seconds. Using the medium light, charge heavy with Fury, and then just do combos, charge heavy for power gain, and then do combos, do a combo, charge heavy into Fury, into your L2, and that will end most fights. And it's just an absurdly quick strategy, and he also is the best counter to Penny for Battlegrounds. Because he's able to get sub 30 second fights reliably with that strategy. After you charge the heavy for Fury, you break the shield in 2 combos, and then you can get a 28 second fight with Surfer versus Penny. And yeah, there are a couple different strategies you can go for using Surfer and Battlegrounds. That's the one I found the most success with, but you can also go for your power gain first. There are certain longer fights where you might want to mix in an L1. If you're fighting Eye-Hulk, you definitely want to change it up to make sure you get enough red damage to bypass his immortality. But yeah, there's a whole lot of different strategies for Surfer, and it allows him to be crazy versatile. Now, next up, we have Hyperion. Hyperion on attack is a bit of a Hail Mary. He is entirely RNG based for how quick his fights are going to be. which is the reason I'm cautious with listing him as a strong attacker, because it really is just so heavily based on RNG. But with being able to counter just such a wide variety of defenders, I think he still has merit on attack, even with how heavily he is based on RNG. And the ceiling is quite high, and he definitely doesn't have such a low floor to the point where you can auto lose rounds if you aren't getting good RNG. But he's definitely one I'd be cautious with using, and not just throwing him at everything and auto drafting him for attack, because he really is entirely based on RNG for whether or not you're going to get a quick fight or not. And the floor, it's not super low, but it's definitely not a high floor. But the ceiling is absolutely absurd. He's had some stupidly quick fights, of course. When you get the good RNG, there's almost no one faster than him. Now, next up for Hulkling. Hulkling's a bit of an interesting one. And I don't fully understand Hulkling yet. But from what I understand, you do your ramp up and you build to your special 2, and the special 2 just ends everything in Battlegrounds, and you're able to get sub 30 second fights with him. And with how easy it is to just build to your special 2 and throw a heavy, and having that just be all the ramp up you need, he seems really, really versatile, and he seems as if he'd be super hard to stop. He could potentially move up to the must-have nukes, but I think I need to wait until, we see more of Hulkling on Battlegrounds attack until we make that call. Now, Gamora is another one that's kind of RNG based, and she's kind of generic. But with Gamora, she just has the absolute highest ceiling for damage in Battlegrounds. I have seen a 15-second kill of her taking Penny Parker, which is the absolute quickest kill I've seen for that. And, if you get good buff RNG, she has the absolute highest ceiling in Battlegrounds. She's just so absurdly quick with the good RNG. And the nice thing about Gamora's RNG is that if you don't need to Hail Mary a fight, you don't need to go for that L1. You don't need to rely on the buff RNG before your L1. If you don't need to Hail Mary a fight, you can just go for your L2. And then it doesn't really matter how good your buff RNG is, as long as it wasn't completely horrible. And by completely horrible, I mean like less than 1% chance of happening, because you just have to get a few buffs and your L2 will kill. And yeah, having that fairly high ceiling for when you don't need to Hail Mary rounds lets an RNG champion like Gamora still shine in Battlegrounds, because if you need the Hail Mary round, if you need that 15-second kill, you can go for that with Gamora if you need to try and Hail Mary and win the round. But most of the time, those 30-second fights with her L2 are going to be enough, and this lets her not have such a low floor when you don't want her to have a low floor, which is just amazing for one of the RNG champs. She is the perfect RNG champion for Battlegrounds, and she is fairly generic, but just due to how high her damage is, she tends to be quite versatile, and having guaranteed crits lets her counter a lot of the annoying crit resist stuff like a Killmonger and whatnot. And yeah, she can be really, really quick, and her ceiling is higher than every other champion, which is just absolutely crazy. And yeah, now for Medusa. Medusa is an interesting one. Her highest merit on attack is more often than not how she affects your opponent's draft, because she can completely make Nimrod, Omega Sentinel, whatever, just worthless placing on defense, which is super, super strong. So although she is fairly generic in terms of the other cosmic rankups, having that ability to completely shut robots down and affecting that drafting in that unique way that is just unique to her is really, really nice, even for someone who is that generic cosmic that I wouldn't normally lean on having that generic cosmic. But since, she has that extra utility of just shutting down robots completely and destroying it, she definitely has a lot of merit as an attacker in BGs. Now, next up for Null. Null is one that I would be extremely cautious with, because he needs Sig 200 for BGs. To have quick fights, he absolutely needs Sig 200. which makes it a lot of investment for BGs, and he's not strong enough to justify a SIG 200 investment for BGs. He's not strong enough in BGs specifically. But if you do have a SIG 200 null, or you want a SIG 200 null for other reasons, a SIG 200 null is very strong in BGs. So it's up to you if you want to take him to SIG 200 or not. An unduped or low SIG or whatever null is going to be completely useless in Battlegrounds. But if you have him at SIG 200, he can be very, very, very strong. So it's up to you whether or not you want to make that call. I would strongly recommend being cautious with it, but he definitely has value there. Now, Odin. Again, Odin is a fairly generic one. For the Cosmic class, he is another one that I would rank with caution, because he is very replaceable by the better Cosmics in the class, but for the bigger HP metas, a lot of the time he was one of the absolute most versatile Cosmics. Because he really could be stretched to a whole load of fights, especially when you were able to ramp him with that L1 before your L2. I used him for a lot of fights like Nick Fury, like Killmonger, like Nimrod, that he doesn't exactly counter, but just having such high general damage lets him really shine even as a general Cosmic. He has a lot of versatility with that, but again, if you have a really strong Cosmic class, you probably don't have much of a reason to rank Odin for BGs. And next up is Cersei, who falls into a similar thing that Odin does, where she mostly takes generic matchups as far as the Cosmic class goes. And, although that's definitely a hit, Cersei doesn't have the hit of only being limited to the higher health pool metas for having the really quick fights. So although she is a fairly generic champion, she can get some pretty reliable 35-second fights with her ramp up in L2. There is a little bit of reliance on crit RNG on her L2 to get quick fights, but it's enough RNG but it's not enough RNG that it's going to matter too much over time. And yeah, she's definitely very, very solid. As far as generic Cosmics go, she's definitely up there for the ones that I would recommend. If you don't have a super strong Cosmic Nuke roster, I would definitely recommend taking Cersei up. If your Cosmic Nuke roster is already sorted, you probably don't have much of a reason to rank Cersei. But if you need the Cosmic boost, definitely rank her up. Now, Galen, we haven't actually seen him in BGs at all yet, but he seems like he's going to be able to get 20-second fights. I would highly recommend ranking him up, because he seems like he's going to be absurdly strong in BGs, and he will likely move up to this must-have nukes category as we actually see him in BGs. I'm just being cautious because we obviously haven't actually seen him yet, but he seems absurdly strong for Battlegrounds. And now, let's get into the attackers I have purposefully left out. So first of all, Venom. Now, Venom is highly based on RNG in terms of getting quick fights, and it is almost entirely RNG, both on crit RNG and buff RNG. There's a lot of RNG there. He does have a fairly high ceiling, and the issue with Venom that specifically I don't like because of his RNG thing is most of the fights you would use Venom for are fairly easy defenders. So having, high RNG reliance on fights that you generally should be winning if you have a good option for, I'm not a fan of. Because those fights are just too easy to have it come down to RNG in general. So I would caution with ranking Venom. And now the next two with Venom Pool and King Groot. These are mostly because they are just those general Cosmic clearers. And although these two can do it solidly and cover the vast majority of the matchups you want Cosmic Champions for, they're not going to be all that quick. They will end with 100% health. They will cover the vast majority of the Cosmic ramp matchups. But if you have, a few Cosmic rank ups that are really good as already, you probably don't have much of a reason to rank these for BGs, with the exception of King Groot, because he can also be a solid defender, but don't rank him with the expectation that he's going to replace, a properly good Cosmic champion for your roster. And now we get into tech. Now, the thing I was mentioning in the intro is with tech, just due to how the class is, there is not much need for tech attackers if you are someone that is good at stretching for the mutant fights, because the mutant fights are in general not all that restrictive. You can stretch a whole lot of counters to work for the vast majority of the mutant defenders, and this tends to be leaning into having not much of a need for specific tech attackers. And what this leads to for rank ups is that I would recommend having most of your tech attacker rank ups be 2-ways. And although I don't normally recommend ranking with the purpose of 2-ways, because I find it's a lot stronger if you go with really strong attackers and really strong defenders than 2-ways that are just alright at both of them. Obviously, the 2-ways that are amazing at both of them should always go up, but in general, I recommend not ranking specifically for 2-ways for that reason. But with Cosmic and with Mystic as well, due to how limited their uses are where you need them for attack, I would actually recommend going for 2-ways with these guys. And specifically with the 2-ways, Omega Sentinel and Nimrod are the big two. Because they are just extremely strong on defense and extremely strong on attack. So ranking those as 2-ways is going to likely cover your tech needs, your very limited tech needs, to be clear, and then they'll be strong on defense for the times that you don't end up needing them, which will be most of the time. So yeah, let's get into it after that disclaimer. So first of all, Ghost. Sig 200 and Sui's makes her just have absurdly quick fights. You can get sub 20-second fights if you have Sui's, and just ending fights in a single L2 with her. It's ridiculous. She's Ghost. Any of the debuff matchups as well, like Toad or I-Bomb or Bishop, she's going to absolutely destroy. She's just an absolute beast. Now next up for Warlock. Warlock is another interesting one, like Archangel in the previous video, where the reason I have Warlock in this must-have is in large part due to countering Sui's. If you have Warlock and the opponent has that poison debuff or bleed debuff on themselves, you're going to be able to very easily abuse that with Warlock for attack, which makes him really, really strong at dealing with a whole lot of matchups. And then also, when you have Sui's on for your Warlock, his damage is just absurd in Battlegrounds, and you can get a lot of fights ended in a single L2. So anytime there's a suicide meta, where everyone's running suicide masteries, or you're running suicide masteries, Warlock is going to be an absolute monster, for both occasions, and that makes him an absolute must-have for anytime there's a meta that involves running Sui's. Just very, very strong. Starkey. Starkey, in the bigger HPs where you have that time to ramp up to 6 or 7 charges, Starkey's damage is absolutely absurd, and he can get a lot of 40-second fights in the higher health pools, which is just absurdly quick. And due to how he gets his damage with the ramp up and then, ending the fight in fairly limited hits, it gives him some pseudo power control, which makes him very strong against specific defenders like Mangog, like Bishop. And you can also use a stun chain with him off of his O1 that will let you chain a few L1s. It's not going to be infinite, of course, but if you have enough ramp up, this will let you entirely end the fight before baiting a single special of chaining those L1s. With how strong his damage is, and that's just super, super powerful. Next up, Omega Sentinel. She has the suicide tag as well. She doesn't exactly need recoil to be a strong attacker, but they just help so much for making her have some absurdly quick fights. She's still quick without them, don't get me wrong, it's just a little bit less reliably quick. which is obviously extremely important for BGs, and she is just so versatile in terms of the matchups she's taking. Anytime she can work for a matchup, she's probably going to be a really strong option. And yeah, she will cover basically all of your mutant killing needs. And yeah. Now, as we get into highly recommended attackers for tech, again, as I mentioned, this class is a bit of a weird one. Past the four I just mentioned, the attackers you need for tech, you don't really need anyone else for tech past those four. But if you don't have all four of those, or if you don't want to be running a recoil meta, you may need one or two more. So let's get into these ones. Again, I strongly encourage you to focus on two ways with these, because the two ways will be very useful with how limited tech's uses on attack in BGs are in general, because most of the mutant defenders are either not that strong of defenders, or they're going to get countered by champions in other classes anyway. So yeah, again, strongly recommend ranking the ones that will serve better as two ways, like Nimrod especially. So yeah, let's get into it. Warlock, not Warlock, Ultron. Ultron is an interesting one, because there is a good bit of RNG reliance in being able to, not RNG reliance, AI reliance, in being able to get a good cycle for your L2. But if you can get a good amount of degens or bleeds up before your L2, and then get a cauterize, and then throw your heavy, and then a fight can just end very quickly like that, and you'll get those sub 40 second fights. But when a fight doesn't go like that, it can get stretched rather far. So there is a little bit of RNG in there, but he does have probably one of the higher ceilings. Among these, he definitely has one of the higher ceilings, but again, there's a good bit of RNG there, and he can handle basically all the mutant matchups you need of him, and of course, stuff like I-Bomb. And with Ultron, he is specifically very, very good at dealing with Domino as well, due to not being able to have his functions failed, which just lets you be reliably quick against Domino, which is super important, of course. And yeah, he is definitely one of the ones that I would, suggest up here, and he can serve as a two-way, but he's a fairly bad two-way in my opinion. As a defender, he's not a particularly strong defender, but he is a defender that can be used if your opponent has, Archangel or whatever, and you want to stop that, then he can serve some purpose. But again, not a super strong defender by any means. Next up, with Otto, he handles basically every mutant matchup, and he's reliably going to kill them in under 40 seconds, or for the bigger HP matchups, a bit longer. He's also an extremely good Terrax counter, which is the more unique thing about Otto here, is he's also a good matchup for almost any of the matchups where you want power control. Terrax, Mangog, a lot of the Mystic class as well. He's one of the more unique tech attackers in Battlegrounds, and that adds a whole lot of value to him, in my opinion. Across these, he's definitely one of the more valuable ones. On attack, he is super duper strong against a whole variety of matchups, and being able to just abuse the heavy charge damage, and especially in shorter fights, having that power lock is super strong, because for a lot of the shorter fights, it means you don't even have to bait a single special before the fight is just already over, which of course against any defender with special animations that you want to avoid is very, very strong. And yeah, next up for Nimrod, you definitely want Sig 200 for him, and you definitely ideally want to be having him in the bigger HP metas. He is still going to be solid on attack with the lower HP metas, but you're definitely going to want to be more careful with where you use him on attack. He's still going to destroy your Dominos, your Toads, and your Saurons and stuff like that will still end in 1L2, but a lot of them you might have to do an L1 and an L2, and then you're going to get significantly longer fights, especially if your Nimrod isn't at Sig 200 already. But with a Sig 200 Nimrod, L1 to L2 can be speeded up considerably with that Energize, and yeah, He does have the power drain that often means you don't have to end up baiting more than one special in a fight, which can definitely help with speeding up fights a lot, since you can just be super aggressive, not worry about the special 3, since your power drain will constantly keep them below the special 3 at minimum, which is very, very powerful, of course. And yeah, he can handle literally every mutant defender, which is great. And yeah, next up for War Machine. War Machine is one that I would highly caution against in this set of tech rank ups, because he's never going to be the best option for any fight. War Machine is more of a, okay, my tech roster is not strong, I really need someone who can deal with the mutants. War Machine is your guy. He can deal with all of the mutants, basically, and he can deal with a wide variety of matchups. But he's not going to be particularly good at any matchups. He's not going to be a top option, a top 5 option for really any fight. So definitely caution with that against ranking War Machine. He will definitely eventually fall out of your deck once you get stronger tech strength up, and maybe he won't even be in your deck right now if you've already got a strong tech roster. So definitely caution against ranking War Machine. Guardian is another interesting one. Guardian often is reliant on forcing on your opponent placing defenders where Guardian is going to be able to parry specials and get quick fights off of that. This is much less the case in the bigger HP. He's definitely a lot more versatile in terms of his speed in the bigger HP metas, where you don't have to worry about getting that L1, L2 off so quickly, but in the lower HP metas, he's definitely one that's reliant on your opponent specifically placing a fight for him. But in the fights that he shines at, he really shines at. You can get an L1, L2 off super quick and just end the vast majority of fights like it's nothing. And yeah, he can really end a lot of fights super quickly. It just has to have your opponent either be forced into placing an opponent that is specifically good for Guardian, or not understand Guardian all that well. But yeah, if that happens, Guardian definitely has quite a lot of merit on attack. And the attackers I'm purposely leaving out for tech class are going to be Cap Sam and Hulkbuster. So to get into Cap Sam, the big reason why I would recommend being cautious with Cap Sam is similar to Null. Cap Sam needs 6200 to be anything worthwhile in BGs. And even at 6200, he's not that strong. Significantly worse than Null for this scenario. He's not even that strong at 6200 in BGs. And this definitely leans to a lot of caution against ranking him, because it is a lot of investment for a champion that will eventually fall out of your deck when you get a stronger tech roster. And having that, it's definitely a lot of caution against ranking him. He can still put in work, he can still win rounds for you, but definitely be cautious with ranking him. I would recommend holding out for better tech options. If you're ranking specifically for Battlegrounds, of course. But yeah, he definitely has some value, but needing 6200 is just such a big blow for someone that isn't that strong in Battlegrounds. So yeah, it's up to you whether or not you want to invest that heavily into him, of course, but needing that heavy investment definitely applies a level of caution with ranking him. And now next up for Hulkbuster, this is a pretty simple one. Hulkbuster gets completely screwed by Stand Your Ground. You have to completely change up your playstyle and go for the L1 strat instead of the L2 strat, which is significantly slower if you want to be able to reliably take fights. Because Hulkbuster gets screwed by Stand Your Ground just completely, because he only has the one heavy hit, and when you're chaining heavies in the corner after an L2, if one hit gets resisted by Stand Your Ground, you get absolutely screwed. I found this out the hard way when Hulkbuster's buff first came and I had been using him in war. I had tried heavy chaining with him in the corner for some fights, and on the fights it worked really, really great, and then on one fight I got my heavy resisted and just immediately died. So definitely be careful with that. If you get your heavy resisted, you're just screwed. He gets screwed over by Stand Your Ground more than any champion in the game. So definitely have a level of caution with that. He's still a strong attacker with the L1 method, but significantly slower, and he loses out on a lot of power control with that. So yeah, be careful with ranking Hulkbuster if you want to rank him for BGs. And next up, for Mystic, this has the scenario of what's going on with Tech, where there are limited uses for these Mystics on attack, but just taken up a notch to like 100, to the point where I really would err against ranking Mystic attackers that aren't going to be useful on defense, with 2 exceptions, and arguably 3 exceptions with Diablo as well. These are the 3. Tigra, Hood, and Diablo are the 3 that I think still have some merit with ranking for BGs, even though they are completely useless on defense. And this is just because of how versatile and how quick they are going to be on attack. But yeah, let's get into this. Oh, I forgot to put the SIG 200. Forgot to put the SIG 200 symbol for Tigra. She obviously absolutely needs high SIG for BGs. And yeah. So let's get into it. Tigra, she's an absolute monster. Anytime you can heavy counter her, she's gonna destroy a fight in like 25 seconds. She's gonna completely destroy the vast majority of fights. She's one of the strongest attackers in BGs, just period. And yeah, she's absurdly strong. If you have her and you're good with her, rank her, stick her up. She's going to do so much work for you. And now Hood is a bit of a weird one for putting in this section for must-have nukes, because once you get a strong nuke roster, most of Hood's uses are going to be covered by better options than him, but he is insanely versatile and can cover just such a wide array of matchups with basically anything. With how unique his damage source is, it's very, very hard to stop him. But it's very rare where Hood is going to be the absolute best option for a fight. And I've been noticing this a lot in my deck. I have, built a very, very strong nuke deck. And I'm at the point with, the nukes in my deck where Hood's uses are few and far between, just because of how strong my other attackers are, that often they're going to be the better option for fights. Even if Hood is a really solid and versatile option, it's making less and less sense to draft him, and I'm actively working to remove him from my deck now because of that. But I would definitely still recommend ranking him to the vast majority of people. I'm just in a weird situation where I have almost all of the nukes ranked. And yeah, let's get into these. Now Wiccan, anytime there's a fuck ton of buffs in a matchup, Wiccan is going to be absurdly quick. And that's basically the TLDR. He's kind of a modern Sim Supreme, but based off of his L1s instead, which makes it viable for Battlegrounds. You can use those Incinerates and Shocks to just create crazy, crazy damage. And yeah, and he also has a lot of defensive use with punishing with those Incinerates from the Neutralize. He's not the strongest defender, so there is a little bit of caution with ranking him for PGs, but with how strong he is going to be on attack for you, I definitely think he's still a worthwhile rank up, and he will have scenarios where you want to use him on defense as well, so I think there's definitely some merit as a two-way there, because like I said, for Mystic class, due to how limited the uses for when you actually want to be using the vast majority of these Mystics on attack are, I would highly recommend keeping most of your Mystic rank ups towards two ways and making sure they are at least serviceable on defense. They don't have to all be crazy defenders, but try and keep most of them to at least being serviceable on defense. And now next up for Dragon Man, really strong on attack, really strong on defense. When a matchup is ripe for Dragon Man, when there are a bunch of buffs on an opponent, but you don't have to worry about those buffs actively hurting you too much, and when you want to avoid baiting specials or something like against an APOC, he can be a very, very strong attacker. Because due to his corner, you can keep an opponent above 2 bars for the vast majority of a fight, and often end fights before ever having to bait a special, which increases the speed of his fights just so much by not having to bait specials. Highly recommend ranking him up. He's very solid on defense as well. There's a lot of scenarios where I force the opponent into having no good Dragon Man counters for the third round, and he's won me rounds off of that. And yeah, a lot of prowess on both attack and defense. Definitely one of the best Mystic BG's rank ups. And yeah, next up, Doom. Doom is a little bit more specific for his use cases in BGs than in Alliance War or something like that. He's not crazy strong on attack, but I have had a fair share of 30-second fights with Doom. Specifically against Cersei and Hyperion and Arcus and Kingpin, where that MD5 feed is just super strong. He absolutely destroys, and obviously he's one of the best defenders, so yeah. Definitely deserves a mention here. Very strong attacker, very strong defender, and he can cover the vast majority of the Mystic uses at least moderately well. It's just very few where he's going to be that top option. And yet, next up, Chavez. Chavez is one that kind of softly breaks the two-way rule that I like to have for Mystics, because she's a pretty weak defender for Battlegrounds. She does have scenarios where she is still decent on defense for BGs, but it's pretty few and far between just because of how quick her best counters are at handling her. And with the low health pools in BGs, generally Chavez is only dangerous in longer fights, because it really needs for the fight to get out of control. And in shorter fights, it's really, really easy to make Chavez never go out of control. But she does have some use on defense, especially if your opponent isn't particularly good at fighting her, or if they did not get one of the good counters. There are definitely nukes that she does stop. They're just few and far between. She stops some nukes, though. Like Starkey, she's really annoying to Starkey, Surfer, whatever. She stops some of the nukes, but she's vulnerable to a lot of nukes. But yeah, for attack, she's extremely versatile in attack and BGs. Any matchup that has buffs, she's going to absolutely destroy. Any matchup that you need to control the power from ability power gain, she's going to destroy. And Jaeger on Vager's Discord has shown her taking on a variety of just random bullshit matchups and doing very well with it against like Bishop and Moleman. She's a very, very solid attacker. Mordo, he is another one similar to Wiccan, sorry. He's similar to Wiccan, where he just absolutely demolishes the high buff matchups very, very quickly. With that L2, you get some Furies up, you pop an L2, any of the high buff matchups are going to get absolutely melted. He's kind of also like Dragon Man, in where he doesn't actually remove the buffs, but he just punishes them instead. But yeah, I mean, he's very quick. And then on defense, he does have some use, due to how his power gain AI can interact. A lot of time, if you just get unlucky with AI with Mordo, he can lead to a pretty long fight on defense if the AI just decides to be passive and turtle up during that power gain and not let you break the heavy in the block, especially if you're running stand your ground. There's some risk of stand your ground punishing the opponent as well. And yeah, he's one of those that can just involve a lot of RNG on the defense, so he's a really solid two-way. And yeah, let's get into Rintra. His L2 slaps. He deals a fuck ton of damage. His neutralize completely stops all buffs, and he's an extremely strong defender. There's not much to him, but what he does very, very well. He's going to be a solid BG's attacker. He's not going to be, getting many cheese fights or anything. But, when he's able to take advantage of his power gains, especially, he's going to be getting really solid attack, and he's one of the best BG's defenders, so there's that going for him. And for Diablo, his L3 can kill basically anything. If you're in a matchup where you can abuse MD5 to get your L3 super quickly, then you can, win fights very easily in the bigger HP matchups, especially. And it lets him be extremely versatile. And yeah, and for shorter fights, you can't really be going for the L3 in the shorter, lower HP matchups, of course. You want to have recoil on, and then you can just cycle L1s and L2s to get some 30-40 second fights, and he's a very versatile attacker so he has a lot of value, but he is definitely one that I would caution against ranking, just because he is completely useless on defense, and again, you want to keep your mystics mostly towards two-ways, of course with the exception of Tiger and Hood. And yeah, Longshot, the reason I'm leaving him out is because he is almost entirely AI reliant, and a little bit of RNG reliance off of his SIG for getting quick fights, and he is a pretty much useless defender in BJs. For every 30-second fight you see with Longshot, you're gonna get fights that go stretched out to a minute as well, and that lack of reliability on defense definitely has me leaning against him. But he is solid, but if you have better options, definitely rank the better options instead. Swidgel is in the same scenario where she just is a little bit RNG based on attack, and then she's useless on defense the vast majority of the time. So I would advise against ranking these three, all basically for the same reason. And then Claire is just not that unique in the Mystic class, so she's easily replaceable and not particularly better than the other Cosmics at almost anything, and she's not good on defense, so she's another one that I would caution against ranking. And yeah, that's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed this part of this as well, and yeah, the Defenders video for this should hopefully be uploaded probably 2 days after this video goes up. So yeah.